Karlene's earliest memories were of cold, dark nights and the soft murmur of her mother's tired voice telling her siblings to sleep, even though they hadn't eaten much. Her mother, a strong yet fragile woman, worked tirelessly at a laundromat, often coming home late, only to find there was still no food on the table. Karlene, the second oldest of four, often felt the weight of responsibility on her small shoulders, trying to comfort her younger siblings while dreaming of a better life. The neighborhood they lived in wasn't kind. Their clothes were always patched, their shoes worn thin, and there was never enough to go around. The other children at school would make fun of them, calling them dirty and poor. Karlene learned early that the world often judged people based on what they had, not who they were. Despite the cruelty, Karlene refused to let it break her. She promised herself that one day, things would change. As Karlene grew older, her understanding of her mother's sacrifices deepened. Her mother would skip meals so that they could eat, and Karlene noticed the exhaustion in her eyes when she came home at night. It wasn't just physical fatigue. It was the burden of trying to make ends meet with very little. Despite the hardships, her mother's love never wavered. She made sure her children stayed in school, even though they often had to wear clothes that didn't fit or were tattered. Karlene admired her mother's strength and vowed to make something of herself, to take the pressure off her mother one day. But as the years passed, she often felt like she was fighting an uphill battle. She worked odd jobs after school, from babysitting to cleaning houses, just to help out. Every dollar earned was a small victory, but it wasn't enough. Karlene began to realize that hard work alone wasn't always enough to break the cycle of poverty. The neighborhood where Karlene grew up was a constant reminder of their situation. The streets were lined with dilapidated buildings, graffiti marking every corner, and the smell of poverty thick in the air. Despite the challenges, Karlene found solace in books. They were her escape, her way out. She would read for hours after finishing her homework, her mind wandering to places far beyond the grimy streets she called home. But even books couldn't protect her from the harsh reality of school. The teasing never stopped. Her classmates called her names: poor girl, dirty, nothing but trash. And every time they laughed at her, it felt like a fresh wound. Yet, Karlene learned to hold her head high, to ignore the whispers behind her back. She kept her focus on the future, on the day she would walk out of that neighborhood and never look back. Despite the pain of being judged and ridiculed, Karlene began to develop a sense of purpose. She had always dreamed of being a nurse, a healer. The idea of helping others, making their pain go away, seemed like the perfect path to escape. But as she grew older, Karlene realized that education would be the key. She couldn't afford medical school, but she could study hard, earn scholarships, and build a future from nothing. Her grades began to improve as she focused more on her studies. Late nights were spent with textbooks and notes, trying to get ahead, despite the distractions of her environment. Karlene knew that success would not come easy, but the thought of a better life kept her going. She dreamed of a house where there was always food on the table, a stable job, and most importantly, the chance to live without fear of judgment. The more Karlene studied, the more she realized the true power of education. It wasn't just about passing exams or earning degrees. It was about empowerment. It was the key that could unlock doors to opportunities she never thought possible. She started to excel academically, winning scholarships and gaining recognition for her hard work. Her teachers began to take notice, and some even offered to help her with her applications to universities. Karlene's mother watched with pride as her daughter's hard work started to pay off. It was a bittersweet feeling for her, though, as she knew that Karlene's future was leading her far away from the struggles of their neighborhood. But her mother, despite her own sacrifices, knew that Karlene was destined for something bigger. With every passing day, Karlene's dreams seemed more achievable, and her resolve to escape her past only grew stronger. The day Karlene received her acceptance letter to a prestigious university was the happiest day of her life. She cried tears of joy, holding the letter in her hands like a golden ticket. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering words of encouragement, though she knew the road ahead would be difficult. College meant leaving home, leaving her family behind, but it also meant the chance to change everything. Karlene's decision to go to university was met with mixed reactions. While her family was proud and excited, some of her old neighbors scoffed, saying she would never make it. "People like you don't get to go to places like that," they said. But Karlene was undeterred. She had heard those words before, and each time they only fueled her determination to prove them wrong. University life was a shock to Karlene. She had never experienced anything like it before. Luxury, comfort, and wealth surrounded her, and at first she felt out of place. She was constantly reminded of how different she was from her classmates, who came from families with money and status. The first few months were tough. She struggled to keep up with the workload, often juggling part-time jobs to pay for books and living expenses. But Karlene refused to quit. She studied relentlessly, often sacrificing sleep for late-night study sessions. She worked hard to make friends, slowly building a circle of people who supported her. Through the ups and downs, Karlene kept her eyes on the prize, a future where she could make a difference, where she would never have to feel ashamed of her past. Despite her best efforts, Karlene couldn't shake the feelings of inadequacy that often crept in. She found herself doubting whether she belonged at the university, questioning her abilities. There were moments when she felt like an imposter, surrounded by people who seemed so much more confident and capable. But her inner strength kept her going. She reminded herself that her struggles had already made her strong, and this was just another challenge to overcome. Karlene sought help when she needed it, whether through counseling or talking to professors who believed in her. Slowly, she began to believe in herself. With every paper she submitted, every test she passed, and every new friend she made, she felt more confident in her place. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. The day Karlene graduated was the moment everything changed. She walked across the stage with her head held high, a degree in hand, knowing that she had beaten the odds. The applause from the crowd seemed to drown out the doubts and judgments that had followed her for so long. She had done it. She had proven to herself, and to the world, that she was capable of greatness. Her mother was there, tears in her eyes, pride shining through her face. It was a bittersweet moment, as Karlene knew it was time to leave behind the life they had known and step into the future. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. The journey wasn't over, and the best was yet to come. After graduation, Karlene returned to her old neighborhood for the first time in years. It was a place filled with memories, some painful, some sweet, but mostly it was a reminder of how far she had come. Her old house, a rundown building with peeling paint and cracked windows, looked the same. Her mother was still there, working hard to make ends meet, but now there was a sense of pride in her eyes. Karlene had made it, and that made all the difference. The people who had once looked down on Karlene and her family now looked at her with a mix of awe and envy. They saw the new car she drove, the fancy clothes she wore, and the confidence she exuded. But Karlene knew that she was still the same person inside. She hadn't changed, not at her core. What had changed was the way the world saw her. They no longer judged her by the rags she once wore, but by the success she had achieved. While Karlene's success was everything she had dreamed of, it wasn't without its challenges. People who had once been her friends now came with their hands out, expecting something in return. The old friends who had mocked her were now asking for favors, seeking to benefit from her newfound wealth. It was a harsh reality for Karlene. She knew that some of these people had only seen her as a project, a source of entertainment, but now they wanted something from her. Karlene struggled with this new dynamic. It hurt to see how quickly people had forgotten her struggles, how quickly they were willing to take advantage of her. But her mother's words rang in her ears. Keep your head high, and your heart even higher. She had worked too hard to let this tarnish her joy. She learned to set boundaries, to give without expecting anything in return, but also to protect herself from those who would take without gratitude. Karlene never forgot where she came from. Despite her success, she remained grounded, always remembering the sacrifices her mother had made for her. She decided to use her newfound wealth and influence to give back to her community. She started a scholarship fund for students from her old neighborhood, providing them with the resources to attend university. It was a way for Karlene to pass on the help she had received during her own journey. She also started volunteering at local shelters and food banks, offering support to families going through the same struggles she had faced. Karlene knew that her success wasn't just about her. It was about creating opportunities for others who were fighting the same battle she once fought. As she saw the difference she was making in others' lives, Karlene felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her success was no longer just a personal victory. It was a victory for everyone who had ever been looked down on because of their background. As Karlene's career began to take off, new challenges emerged. She was offered a high-paying job at a prestigious hospital, but it required moving to another city. It was an opportunity that would allow her to make an even bigger impact, but it also meant leaving behind the family and friends she had fought so hard to be close to. The decision was not easy. Karlene spent weeks weighing her options, struggling with the idea of leaving her home, her roots, behind. Her mother was supportive, encouraging her to follow her dreams, but Karlene felt guilty. She didn't want to abandon the community that had shaped her. But after much thought, she realized that success was not about staying in one place. It was about growing, learning, and pushing herself to new limits. She took the job, knowing that it was the next step in her journey. Moving to a new city was both exciting and overwhelming. The hustle and bustle of a larger, more developed place was a far cry from the small, close-knit neighborhood Karlene had grown up in. At first, she felt like an outsider, just another newcomer trying to fit in. But Karlene was no stranger to adversity. She threw herself into her work, determined to make the most of this opportunity. Her colleagues at the hospital were kind, but Karlene couldn't help but notice the subtle ways they treated her differently. She was still the poor girl from the rough neighborhood, despite her impressive credentials and the years of hard work she had put in. She realized that, no matter how far she went, there would always be people who looked at her past and judged her based on it. But she no longer let that bother her. She knew who she was, and no one could take that away from her. Despite the success she had achieved, Karlene found herself yearning for peace. She had worked so hard for so long, pushing herself to the brink, that she had neglected her own well-being. The pressure to succeed, to prove everyone wrong, had been overwhelming. She began to take time for herself, practicing meditation and mindfulness, reconnecting with the things that brought her joy. She started to build a new life in the city, making new friends, finding hobbies outside of work. She learned to balance ambition with self-care, recognizing that true success wasn't just about accolades or money. It was about living a life that felt fulfilling and authentic. Karlene was finally beginning to understand that happiness wasn't a destination but a journey. And on this new path, she felt at peace with who she was, no longer defined by her past or the judgments of others. Years went by, and Karlene's life continued to evolve. She had become a leader in her field, gaining recognition for her work and inspiring others with her story. But the more successful she became, the more she realized how important it was to stay connected to her roots. She began visiting her old neighborhood more frequently, staying involved in local projects, and reconnecting with the people who had once been a part of her life. It wasn't always easy. Some of the people from her past still looked at her with a mix of awe and jealousy. But Karlene no longer let it affect her. She knew that people's opinions didn't define her, her actions did. And as she returned to the place that had shaped her, she could see the changes, both in the neighborhood and in herself. She had come full circle, and in that moment, she realized that the struggles she had faced had made her who she was, and that was something to be proud of. One day, as Karlene was walking through her old neighborhood, she ran into some of the same people who had once judged her. There was Tanya, the girl who had mocked Karlene's clothes in school, and Marcus, the boy who used to call her family the dirty poor ones. They were standing outside the corner shop, chatting like old friends. Karlene's heart skipped a beat, but she composed herself and walked over, her steps confident. Well, if it isn't Karlene," Tanya said with a surprised smile, her voice a mix of nostalgia and awkwardness. "Look at you. You've really made it, huh?" Karlene smiled back, but there was no bitterness in her heart. "Yeah, I guess I have," she replied. "And I never forgot where I came from. How've you two been?" The conversation that followed was a mixture of polite small talk and half-hearted attempts to reconnect. It was clear that they both respected Karlene now, though perhaps they were still a bit embarrassed by their past behavior. Tanya nervously mentioned how she had seen Karlene on TV once, and Marcus shyly admitted he had heard about her charity work. "You've really done well for yourself," he said, the words almost sounding like an apology. Karlene nodded, feeling a strange sense of closure. She had long ago let go of the pain they had caused her. "Thanks," she said, and after a moment of silence added, "It's good to remember where we all started, though, don't you think?" Walking away from that encounter, Karlene felt an unexpected weight lift from her shoulders. For years, she had carried the resentment of being looked down upon. But seeing Tanya and Marcus again reminded her that forgiveness wasn't just about letting others off the hook. It was about freeing herself from the burden of anger. She realized that, just as she had evolved, so had they. People grow, change, and learn from their mistakes. Perhaps they hadn't fully understood the hurt they'd caused back then, but now, in the present, they had the chance to acknowledge it. That moment of grace wasn't just for them. It was for Karlene, too. Letting go of the past, truly forgiving them, and walking away without bitterness was the final step toward healing. Karlene didn't need their validation anymore. She had found her worth on her own. She had built a life on her own terms, and the people who once looked down on her were now part of a past she had outgrown. But that encounter had given her a sense of peace she hadn't known she needed. Several months after her reunion with Tanya and Marcus, Karlene received an invitation to speak at a local charity event in her old neighborhood. It was an opportunity to share her story, inspire others who were still struggling, and demonstrate that change was possible, no matter where you started. The event would be held in the same community center where she had spent countless afternoons, trying to avoid the bullies and escaping into her books. At first, Karlene hesitated. She was busy with her demanding job, and she had moved so far beyond the person she once was. But something told her that this was an important moment. A chance to give back, not just with money, but with her story. So, she accepted the invitation and began preparing her speech. On the day of the event, Karlene stood in front of a small crowd of young adults and teenagers, many of whom reminded her of her younger self. The room was filled with energy and curiosity, but there was a palpable sense of skepticism in the air. These kids had heard the same promises before. Stories of people who'd made it out and forgotten where they came from. Karlene had a different story to tell. Karlene stepped onto the stage, and the room fell silent. Her heart raced for a moment, but she took a deep breath and began speaking from the heart. "I grew up in this neighborhood, just like some of you," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I know what it feels like to be counted out, to be told that your dreams are too big for your circumstances. People looked down on my family. We were always the dirty ones, the poor ones. But I'm here today to tell you that where you start doesn't determine where you can go." She told them about the struggles of her childhood, the long nights without food, and the mockery she faced at school. But she also told them about the power of education, of never giving up on themselves, and the importance of staying true to who they were. "Your background doesn't define you," she said. "You define yourself by what you do and how you rise above your challenges." As Karlene spoke, she noticed the faces of the young people in the audience begin to change. Some were nodding in understanding, others were wiping away tears. She had their attention, and for the first time in a long while, Karlene felt like she was truly giving something back to her community. Not just money, but the gift of hope. The charity event was a turning point for Karlene. It wasn't just about inspiring others. It was also about reconnecting with a part of herself she hadn't realized she had lost. She realized that, in the rush to build her successful career and prove herself to the world, she had forgotten how powerful it could be to help others in the way that people had once helped her. In the weeks following the event, Karlene continued to mentor local youth, helping them with their studies, offering career advice, and even helping them apply for scholarships. She partnered with a nonprofit organization to offer workshops on financial literacy, empowering young people to take control of their future. Through these efforts, Karlene began to feel the kind of fulfillment she had been seeking for years, a sense of purpose that came not from her career, but from the positive impact she was making in others' lives. As her influence in the community grew, Karlene found herself facing new challenges. Some people from her past, particularly those who had once praised her success, now began to criticize her efforts. They accused her of forgetting where she came from, suggesting that her charity work and involvement in the neighborhood were just a way to gain favor and boost her public image. At first, the criticism stung. It was hard to hear people she had once respected question her motives. But Karlene quickly reminded herself that people would always have opinions, especially when they didn't understand the full picture. She had done the hard work, made the sacrifices, and earned everything she had. Her desire to help her community was not born out of guilt, but from a genuine place of wanting to give back. In the end, the opinions of others mattered little. Her work was speaking for itself, and that was enough. As Karlene continued to serve her community, she found herself growing in ways she hadn't anticipated. The more she gave, the more she received: insight, understanding, and connection. She began to realize that service to others wasn't a side project or something to be done for recognition. It was a way of life. Helping those who were struggling, just as she once had, filled her with a deeper sense of purpose than anything her career could offer. She began organizing community events, educational workshops, career fairs, and health clinics. She reached out to local businesses, encouraging them to give back in meaningful ways. Karlene found that when you lead with compassion, others follow. Slowly, The neighborhood she once thought of as hopeless began to transform, not because of a few big donations, but because people started to care for one another. The ripple effect was undeniable. Her role in the community became more than just a professional commitment. It became a calling. Her success was no longer measured in titles or paychecks. It was measured by the lives she touched and the future she helped build for the next generation. In her heart, Karlene knew that this was the true legacy she wanted to leave behind. One afternoon, as Karlene was preparing for another community meeting, she received an unexpected call from a well-known nonprofit organization. They had heard about the work she was doing in her neighborhood and were impressed by the impact she had made. The organization, dedicated to promoting education and economic empowerment in underprivileged communities, wanted to offer her a position on their executive board. At first, Karlene was stunned. She had never sought out these kinds of opportunities. Her life had always been about making a difference where she was, without looking for external validation. But the offer was enticing. It was a chance to expand her reach, to help even more people, and to work alongside others who shared her passion for change. She spent days weighing the decision. On one hand, it could provide her with more resources and influence to help those she cared about. On the other hand, it would require her to step back from the hands-on work she had been doing in her own neighborhood. It wasn't an easy choice, but in the end, Karlene knew she had always believed in the power of collaboration. She accepted the position, knowing that the mission remained the same: lifting others up and creating opportunities for those who needed it most. Taking on a leadership role at the nonprofit organization required a shift in Karlene's priorities. The work was demanding, and the travel increased. She found herself juggling her new responsibilities with her ongoing efforts in her community. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when she felt stretched thin, torn between her desire to be there for her family, her neighborhood, and the larger causes she now championed. But Karlene had learned to be resourceful over the years. She built a strong support system of like-minded individuals who shared her vision. She worked with local leaders, empowering them to take charge of projects, knowing that her strength was in building others up, not just doing everything herself. Slowly, she found a rhythm that allowed her to balance her various commitments without sacrificing the core values that had gotten her to this point. Through it all, Karlene never lost sight of what truly mattered: helping others. Whether she was in her community or at a global summit, her goal remained the same: to make the world a better place, one person at a time. As Karlene's success continued to grow, so did the pressure. She began to experience doubt more frequently. Was she doing enough? Was she really making the difference she had set out to achieve, or was she just becoming another person in the spotlight, detached from the struggles of those she was trying to help? One night, after a particularly exhausting day of meetings and conferences, Karlene sat alone in her office, staring at the city lights outside her window. She thought about the old neighborhood again, the place where it had all started. There, everything had been simple. The challenges had been stark and obvious, and her role had been clear. But now, with so many projects and people to support, it sometimes felt as though the real impact was harder to measure. Karlene took a deep breath and reminded herself of why she had begun this journey. She wasn't in it for the accolades. She was in it because she had seen firsthand how one person's dedication could change the lives of many. It was okay to have doubts. They were part of the process. What mattered was that she continued moving forward, keeping her heart focused on the work, and always staying connected to the people who had been with her from the very beginning. In the months that followed, Karlene started organizing more grassroots initiatives in her neighborhood. While her role at the nonprofit kept her busy, she felt a pull to her roots. She spent weekends volunteering at the local community center, visiting local schools, and hosting mentorship sessions. She began to see the power of community again. It wasn't just about individual efforts. It was about coming together to support each other. Karlene's work had sparked a movement, a spirit of collective action. People in her neighborhood, inspired by her dedication, started taking on leadership roles of their own. Small businesses partnered to provide jobs and training, and local schools began offering after-school programs and workshops. Karlene realized that true change didn't come from a single person's effort, but from the collective strength of a community working together. She could be the catalyst, but it was the people themselves who had the power to transform their lives. It wasn't long before Karlene's work began to attract national attention. She was invited to speak at conferences, interviewed by major media outlets, and even nominated for awards recognizing her contributions to social change. While she was grateful for the recognition, Karlene knew it was more than just a pat on the back. It was a responsibility. With each honor, the stakes grew higher. She felt the weight of her success in a new way. The more people looked up to her, the more pressure there was to succeed. She started to feel like the world was watching, expecting her to continue making progress, to keep breaking barriers and pushing for change. But instead of letting it overwhelm her, Karlene embraced the responsibility. She knew that every step she took could help others find their own path to success. She wasn't alone in this journey. She had a team of people who shared her vision, and together, they could accomplish even more. Karlene's role wasn't to carry the weight alone, but to help lift others up, one step at a time. One of the greatest rewards of Karlene's success was witnessing the transformation of her old neighborhood. The changes were gradual, but they were undeniable. Where once there were empty lots and abandoned buildings, new businesses began to thrive. Families who had struggled to make ends meet were now finding opportunities. Young people who had once been told they wouldn't amount to anything were becoming leaders in their own right. Karlene's neighborhood, once a place of poverty and despair, had become a symbol of hope. It was no longer defined by its struggles, but by the resilience and determination of its people. Karlene looked around at the community she had helped transform, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. She had come full circle. What started as a dream to escape the life she was born into had turned into a dream fulfilled, not just for her, but for everyone around her. The last chapter of Karlene's story isn't a conclusion, it's a beginning. With every person she helped, every life she touched, Karlene had created a ripple effect. The journey she had started as a young girl in a poor neighborhood had led her to a place where she was no longer just surviving, but thriving, not because of the things she had achieved, but because of the lives she had changed. Karlene had become a beacon of hope, not just for her community, but for anyone who had ever been judged based on their background. She was living proof that no matter where you come from, you can rise above your circumstances if you have the heart, the drive, and the determination to push forward. The true measure of success was not in wealth or titles, but in the legacy of love and empowerment you left behind. And for Karlene, that was the greatest victory of all. Despite the progress Karlene had witnessed, she knew the journey wasn't over. Change, while palpable, was still in its infancy in her neighborhood. She realized that transformation wasn't just about rebuilding physical spaces, but rebuilding the mindset of the people living there. Poverty, despite being alleviated through her efforts, had left scars in the community's spirit. Karlene knew that long-lasting change needed to be anchored in education and empowerment. She worked tirelessly to expand the scholarship program and partnered with local businesses to offer mentorship opportunities. She created the Seeds of Change initiative, a program designed to teach young people life skills, entrepreneurship, and financial literacy. It was her dream to help them realize that their potential wasn't defined by their zip code or their past. The first workshop, held in the old community center where Karlene had spent countless afternoons as a child, was an overwhelming success. Seeing so many young faces eager to learn, Karlene felt a deep sense of fulfillment. These were the seeds of change, and she was watching them grow before her eyes. As Karlene's influence grew, so did her sense of responsibility. She had become a mentor to many, not only in her community, but in the broader network of individuals who sought her guidance. Everyone, from local youth to young professionals, turned to her for advice. While Karlene loved being able to guide and uplift others, she sometimes found herself burdened by the weight of their expectations. At times, she felt drained, unable to provide the answers everyone seemed to be seeking. She didn't have all the answers. She was still learning, still growing. But she understood the importance of vulnerability. One evening, during a community event, Karlene made a speech that was different from the usual motivational talks. "I'm not perfect," she confessed. "I don't always know the right path. But what I do know is that none of us are meant to walk this journey alone. I've learned more from you than I've ever been able to teach. Let's keep growing together." The honesty in her words resonated with the audience, and the room filled with a quiet, shared understanding. Karlene's openness allowed others to see that it was okay not to have everything figured out, that success wasn't just about achievements, but about the willingness to be real with oneself and others. Karlene's nonprofit had started to take off, and she was approached by several cities that wanted to replicate her community-building model. The idea of spreading her work nationwide was tempting, But it also came with its own set of challenges. Could she expand without losing the personal touch that made her work so effective? Could she create real impact in other communities without losing focus on the one that had given her everything? She spent months traveling to different cities, learning about their unique challenges and meeting local leaders. Each city she visited had its own set of problems, and Karlene knew she couldn't simply transplant her formula into another place and expect it to work. Every community was different, every person had different needs. She had to learn to adapt her approach without compromising her core values. It wasn't easy. Some cities were more resistant to change than others, and Karlene often found herself questioning if she could truly make a difference in places that seemed far more entrenched in their problems. But each time she doubted herself, she reminded herself of how far she had come. She had once been a girl from a broken neighborhood, and now she was changing the world, one community at a time. As Karlene's profile grew, so did the scrutiny. The public eye was always watching, waiting for her to stumble. In some ways, it was flattering. In others, it was overwhelming. She received countless messages of support, but also criticisms from people who felt she was selling out or forgetting her roots. There was one particular article that stung deeply. A journalist questioned her authenticity, accusing her of using her community's struggles as a stepping stone to fame and fortune. The hurtful words hit Karlene hard, but she knew she couldn't let them define her. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let a few negative opinions derail her mission. Karlene chose not to respond publicly, but in her heart, she knew that she had nothing to prove to anyone. The people who truly understood her journey, those who had seen her rise, from the child with nothing to the woman who gave everything back, were the ones whose opinions mattered. In private, she confided in her mother, who had always been her anchor. "Keep your eyes on the goal," her mother advised. "People will talk, but their words don't feed your purpose." Amidst her national success, Karlene realized something important. She had grown so focused on expanding her work that she had neglected the very neighborhood that had shaped her. Her old community, though still benefiting from her efforts, had begun to feel distant in her heart. She had to return to where it all started and reconnect with the people who had supported her from the very beginning. One quiet evening, Karlene returned to the neighborhood on her own. She walked through the streets she had once walked with her mother, past the old house, now renovated, and into the community center where so many of her dreams had been born. The faces that greeted her were familiar, though a few years older. But the warmth and love were the same. People stopped to chat, ask how she was doing, and share their own journeys. Karlene was reminded of how important it was to stay grounded. It wasn't the accolades or recognition that mattered. It was the love of the community she had helped build, the connections she had fostered, and the changes she had made at the most personal level. As the years passed, Karlene saw her work take root in ways that went beyond her expectations. Her scholarships, mentorship programs, and community outreach initiatives had created a ripple effect, inspiring not only those who had benefited directly from her programs, but also a new generation of leaders in the community. The youth she had mentored were now adults, starting businesses, creating programs of their own, and returning the favor to the next generation. Karlene began to see her legacy in real time. It wasn't just about her personal success, it was about the community's success. There were young men and women who had once been at risk of falling through the cracks, now thriving as entrepreneurs, doctors, teachers, and artists. The transformation was complete. During a celebratory event one evening, Karlene stood in front of the crowd. "This is not my victory," she said with a smile. "This is ours. Together, we've built something that will last long after I'm gone. Our community is a living testament to what can happen when we believe in each other." Her words echoed through the crowd, a symbol of hope that had turned into a powerful reality. Karlene knew that, while she had planted the seeds, it was the community itself that had nurtured the growth. Though Karlene had built a successful nonprofit, there came a time when she realized it was time to step back. She had poured so much of herself into the organization that it had become her identity, but she knew it was no longer healthy to stay in the driver's seat forever. After years of building a team of capable leaders who shared her vision, Karlene felt confident that they were ready to take the reins. The day she handed over the leadership was emotional, but it was also empowering. It wasn't about leaving her dream behind. It was about empowering others to continue what she had started. "I trust you all," she said in her farewell speech to the team. "You're the next wave of change, and I'm excited to see where you take this. The work isn't over, It's only just begun. Karlene wasn't leaving the nonprofit world entirely. She remained involved as an advisor and continued her efforts to support new initiatives. But she finally allowed herself the space to breathe, to live, and to enjoy the fruits of her labor. She had built something strong, something sustainable, and now it was in capable hands. With the nonprofit in good hands, Karlene took a step back and looked toward new horizons. She had always been someone who sought purpose, but now she wanted to explore other passions. She traveled more, spent time writing, and even began work on a book about her journey. From a poor girl with nothing to a woman who built a legacy of hope. She realized that success wasn't a one-time achievement. It was a continual process of growth, reinvention, and giving back. Karlene had come full circle, from the child in a rundown neighborhood to a woman who had changed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others. Now she was ready to embrace the next chapter, knowing that her true legacy was not just in what she had achieved, but in the people who would continue the work long after she was gone. Years later, Karlene sat on the porch of her childhood home, watching the sunset. Her mother sat beside her, both of them content in the quiet peace they had created together. Karlene had made it. And not just for herself, she had changed the world around her. Her children had grown up in a world she had built for them, a world of possibilities, opportunity, and love. She had done what she set out to do, and in the process, she had created a new story, a story of hope, resilience,